Did you know Red Fox before you started doing the series?
Everybody knows Red Fox. I didn't know him personally. I knew him, but I didn't know him personally. He's a fantastically talented man.
In 2026, at 80 years old, Demond. Wilson finally broke his silence, and what he revealed did not sound like gossip, but like a truth he had been carrying for more than half a century. Sitting far from the spotlight, he spoke about Red Fox, the man America adored as Fred Sanford, the face of laughter on Sanford and Son, and a cultural icon who helped redefine black comedy in the 1970s.
But Demond says that behind the jokes, behind the studio lights, Red Fox was living a completely different life. A life marked by cocaine addiction that followed him onto set, gambling losses that wiped out millions, and secret relationships that had to stay buried in an era where exposure could end a black man's career overnight. On October 11, 1991, when Red collapsed on the set of The Royal Family, the crew laughed at first, believing it was another routine gag, until 4 hours later, he was pronounced dead in a Los Angeles hospital, broke, in debt, and alone. Demond now claims that what the public saw as comedy was survival, and what looked like fame was slow destruction. The question he leaves us with is unsettling. How many truths were hidden to keep America laughing, and how much of Red Fox had already died long before his heart finally stopped? Stay with us, because once you hear what Demond says happened behind closed doors, the laughter will never sound the same again. And to understand why Demond waited this long to speak, we have to return to the place where laughter first became a survival instinct rather than a choice. Demond Wilson says that when people talk about Red Fox, they usually start with the jokes, the money, the television fame, but they skip the years when every laugh was a shield. Red was born on December 8, 1922, in St. Louis, at the bottom of the Great Depression, into a black household already bent under poverty and instability. The rooms were small, the air was heavy. His mother drank to escape. His father vanished early, leaving silence where protection should have been. Some days there was food. Many days there was only tension and the sound of arguments bleeding through thin walls. Demond says Red learned early that noise meant danger, and silence meant something worse. By the time Red turned 13, childhood was already over. He sold newspapers on street corners, hustled strangers for coins, and stole when hunger made morals feel optional. He watched men get beaten for talking back. He watched women disappear into rooms and return different. In that environment, Demond says, Red discovered something powerful. If he made people laugh, they hesitated. Anger paused. Fists stayed down. Humor became his armor. There is one story Demond says Red shared only once, late at night, long after the cameras were gone. A winter evening, the apartment cold, his mother drunk and pacing, words slurred and sharp at the same time. In a moment of rage and confusion, she screamed that he would never be loved, never escape, never amount to anything. Demond says Red believed those words followed him like a shadow, not as memory, but as prophecy. He laughed for the world, but inside he was still arguing with that voice. As a teenager, Red ran. He dropped out of school and escaped to Chicago, believing distance might quiet the past. Instead, he found a city where racism was louder and survival demanded speed. Black neighborhoods in the 1930s were crowded, tense, and watched closely. Police harassment was routine. Work was scarce. Respect was fragile. In that world, comedy was not clean. It was dirty, fast, and dangerous. Red learned to tell obscene jokes in smoky backroom bars, places where laughter could buy you another drink or another night without trouble. He learned timing not from applause, but from watching eyes and hands, reading the room to know when to push and when to retreat. Demond says those nights shaped him more than television ever could. Red's humor was sharp because it had to be. He mocked pain before it could mock him. He crossed lines because fear had already crossed every boundary in his life. By the late 1940s and 1950s, those routines turned into underground party records, passed hand to hand, played behind closed doors. They sold in the millions quietly because the mainstream was not ready to claim him. DeMond calls it the black hustle economy, where success existed long before recognition, but safety never arrived. When Hollywood finally noticed, it wasn't because Red had softened. It was because television needed authenticity dressed as comedy. Sanford and Son debuted in 1972, and suddenly Red Foxx was everywhere. America saw a loud, fearless junk dealer who insulted everyone and laughed at death. What they didn't see, DeMond says, was the man between takes, the one who sat quietly, the one who stared at the floor, the one who flinched at sudden noises. Fame gave him money and visibility, but it did not give him rest. DeMond describes moments on set that felt wrong even then. Red disappearing into dressing rooms longer than necessary. Mood swings that arrived without warning. Jokes that landed too close to real wounds. DeMond hints that the habits Red formed young did not disappear with success. They adapted. Late nights turned into substances that numbed faster. Gambling offered the illusion of control. Risk felt familiar. Safety felt suspicious. There is a darker detail DeMond alludes to carefully. He says Red spoke about his childhood not as something that ended, but as something that waited, like a trap door beneath the stage. The more Red succeeded, the more he feared falling back through it. DeMond suggests that some of the excess, the addiction, even the chaos, were ways of proving that his mother's words had not won, that he could build something even while tearing himself apart. By the mid-1970s, Red was a television icon. By the early 1980s, the cracks were impossible to hide. DeMond says the pain of childhood did not fade with age. It sharpened. It resurfaced in moments of silence, in nights alone, in the quiet after laughter died down. The hustle had carried him from St. Louis to Chicago to Hollywood, but it had also carried every unresolved wound with it. DeMond's voice softens when he talks about this period. He says Red did not want sympathy. He wanted understanding. He wanted someone to see that the man who made America laugh learned comedy in places where laughter was the only way to survive. And DeMond believes that when people talk about Red Fox's downfall, they miss the truth. The tragedy did not begin with fame, addiction, or debt. It began decades earlier in a small apartment with a child learning that jokes could keep him alive. And as DeMond tells it now, at 80 years old, that is the part of the story Red never escaped, no matter how far he ran. And if Red's childhood explains how he survived, his career explains how survival slowly turned into self-destruction. DeMond Wilson says the first time he truly understood who Red Foxx was did not happen on a television set, but in a dressing room filled with cigarette smoke and unfinished jokes. By the mid-1950s, Red was already a legend in black underground comedy, long before America pretended to know his name. In 1956, when his album Laugh of the Party circulated through nightclubs and backrooms, it was considered dangerous, obscene, and unstoppable. The jokes were dirty, sharp, and unapologetic because Red believed clean comedy was a luxury black men could not afford. He used shock as defense, laughter as leverage, and profanity as armor. DeMond says Red taught him early that comedy was not about being liked. It was about surviving the room. On stage, Red was fearless. Off stage, he was restless, pacing, checking doors, looking for something to quiet his mind. By 1970, his face reached mainstream audiences through the film Cotton Comes to Harlem, where he played humor with an edge that still carried street truth. Hollywood laughed, but it never fully trusted him. Everything changed in January 1972 when Sanford and Son premiered. 135 episodes later, Fred Sanford was no longer just a character. He was a symbol, loud, bitter, hilarious, a black man who talked back to the world and lived to tell the joke. Demond says Red understood the weight of that instantly. He knew millions were watching. He knew he was opening doors whether he wanted to or not. Behind the scenes, Red became a mentor in ways the public never saw. He pushed younger comedians to stop apologizing for their voices. Demond recalls Red talking openly about comedians like Richard Pryor and later Eddie Murphy, insisting that black comedy needed truth, not polish. He defended artists who were labeled too angry, too raw, too political. He openly supported civil rights causes and spoke in defense of the Black Panther Party at a time when doing so could destroy a career. But Demond also reveals the cost. As ratings climbed, Red's habits worsened. The pressure to deliver every take with explosive energy pushed him toward chemical shortcuts. According to Demond, Red kept small vials hidden on set, not to party but to function. Lines taken between takes, long pauses in his trailer, sudden bursts of energy followed by crashes so severe, filming had to stop. Demond says the crew learned to read his moods the way sailors read weather. There were incidents no one ever explained publicly. Days when Red deliberately started arguments with producers to distract from his condition. Moments when shouting matches were staged so cameras would turn away while someone escorted him off set. Demond remembers one afternoon in 1974 when filming halted after Red collapsed into a chair, sweating, shaking, insisting he was fine. The scene was rewritten, the schedule adjusted, the illusion preserved. Despite everything, Red kept giving. He donated quietly. He paid hospital bills for strangers. He mentored relentlessly. He believed black comedians had to break through doors even if it meant bleeding on the hinges. Fred Sanford became a cultural landmark, proof that black rage and humor could coexist on American television. By the late 1970s, however, the damage was visible. Stroke symptoms appeared. Energy vanished. Financial problems followed. Demond says Red felt betrayed. He had carried the show, carried the culture, and yet felt disposable the moment he slowed down. The industry that once celebrated him began to distance itself. Now, at 80, Demond's voice tightens when he reflects on those years. He says Red taught him how to command a room, how to make pain funny, how to survive as a black man in a system designed to exhaust you. But he also watched that same system take everything back: the fame, the money, the health, the support. Demond says the cruelest part is this: Red Foxx gave America laughter that reshaped comedy forever. He opened doors that others walked through safely, and when he finally stumbled, the applause stopped. The phones went silent. The legend was left alone with the habits that once kept him standing. And that, Demond insists, is the part of the story people were never meant to hear. And this is where the laughter finally collapses, because nothing is more shocking than discovering that a legend died with empty pockets and unanswered debts. Demond Wilson says that when people hear the name Red Foxx, they still imagine money, mansions, and the kind of wealth television stars are supposed to have. What they do not imagine is paperwork, court letters, red-stamped warnings, and a man counting casino chips at 3 a.m, trying to convince himself that the next hand will fix everything. At his peak in the mid-1970s, Red Foxx was earning one of the highest salaries on television. During the early seasons of Sanford and Son, his income climbed rapidly, and by the end of the decade, his estimated net worth hovered around $3 million, a fortune for a black entertainer of his generation. He bought a large house in Las Vegas, filled it with custom furniture, gold-trimmed decor, and more than one Cadillac parked out front, each one a symbol that he had escaped the hunger of his childhood. But Demond says the money never stayed still. It flowed out as fast as it came in. Cocaine drained thousands at a time. Gambling swallowed tens of thousands in a single night. Red did not gamble casually. He chased losses with obsession, sitting at tables until sunrise, convinced the universe owed him one last win. DeMond remembers Red calling him after long nights, his voice raw, admitting he had lost more than he planned, more than he could afford, but insisting he was still in control. By the early 1980s, the warnings began arriving in the mail. The Internal Revenue Service started flagging unpaid taxes that had accumulated quietly year after year. Red ignored them at first, then he negotiated, then he delayed. By the time he realized how serious it had become, the number had grown terrifying. $4 million in back taxes, penalties, and interest, and a debt larger than what he had left. DeMond paints a scene that feels almost cinematic in its cruelty. It is late 1988. Red sits alone in his Las Vegas living room, lights off except for a lamp near the phone. Stacks of envelopes sit unopened on the table. The Cadillac outside is already marked for seizure. He pours a drink, stares at the wall, and jokes bitterly that even the government waited longer than his marriages did. But the joke does not land. No one is there to hear it. By 1990, the collapse becomes visible. The IRS moves in. Furniture is cataloged. Vehicles are taken. Bank accounts are frozen. DeMond recalls visiting the house and feeling like he had walked into a staged crime scene. Drawers open, labels on items, rooms stripped of personality. The house that once echoed with laughter and parties now felt hollow, as if the walls themselves were ashamed. When Red died on October 11, 1991, the shock was not just the suddenness of the heart attack on set, but what followed immediately after. There was no hidden fortune, no secret account, no safety net. Friends were stunned to learn that Red Foxx, a man who had entertained America for decades, could not pay for his own funeral. The service was covered by friends and colleagues who refused to let him be buried without dignity. Then came the disputes. DeMond says the weeks after the funeral were filled with tension that felt uglier than anything Red experienced while alive. His third wife, Joy Yun-ho, and his daughter, Debraca Denise, found themselves on opposite sides of legal filings. Documents went missing. Wills were questioned. Old contracts resurfaced. Lawyers circled what little remained. The Las Vegas house, already stripped, became a symbol of decay rather than wealth. It was during this period, DeMond says, that rumors long buried began to resurface. Whispers about letters, about agreements meant to keep certain aspects of Red's life private. DeMond is careful with his words. He does not claim proof. He says only that Red once told him there were parts of his life that could not survive exposure in the 1970s, and that protecting those secrets cost him more than money. Some believed missing documents held personal confessions. Others believed they explained why certain assets vanished quietly before the IRS arrived. The Las Vegas house was eventually abandoned. Neighbors reported lights turning on at night, then going dark again. Dust settled. The gates rusted. DeMond says stepping inside later felt wrong, like trespassing in someone else's grief. Casino receipts still sat in drawers. Notes scribbled with numbers and dates were taped to the fridge, a life measured in losses rather than wins. DeMond does not absolve Red. In fact, his tone hardens here. He says plainly that addiction destroyed him. Gambling devoured his judgment. Pride kept him from asking for help. This was Red's fault, DeMond says, not with anger, but with exhaustion. He told me himself he knew, he just could not stop. The climax of this chapter is not a courtroom or a headline. It is a quiet image DeMond cannot forget. A few days before Red's death, he visited him in Los Angeles. The apartment was smaller now. The furniture was sparse. Red joked about downsizing. He laughed about being broke. But when DeMond looked closer, he saw panic behind the humor. Red admitted he had lost track of how bad it had become. He spoke about nights in casinos where he stayed until he was physically shaking, chasing a feeling he could no longer reach. When Red Foxx collapsed on set, The world thought it was another joke. When he died, the world assumed he left millions behind. DeMond says the cruel truth is simpler and far more painful. Red died stripped of the wealth that once defined his success, buried under debts that outlived him, and remembered as a legend whose final chapter was written in unpaid bills and empty rooms. And DeMond leaves us with one last image that refuses to fade. A man who spent his life making others laugh, standing alone at a casino table, pockets empty, convinced the next hand would save him while the clock quietly ran out. And this is where the story reaches its most disturbing turn, because the way Red Foxx died looks nothing like the way a legend is supposed to leave the world. DeMond Wilson says the morning of October 11, 1991 began, like hundreds of others they had lived through on sets across Los Angeles. It was still dark when Red Foxx arrived at the studio to film The Royal Family. He was 68 years old, visibly thinner than he had been a decade earlier, moving slower, breathing heavier, but still joking as he walked through the door. DeMond remembers him greeting crew members by name, complaining about the cold, and making a joke about how he was too old to be standing under hot lights anymore. No one heard fear in his voice. They heard Red. By mid-morning, filming began. Cameras rolled. Scripts were marked. The set was bright, crowded, and noisy, the kind of place where real pain often gets mistaken for performance. DeMond says Red had complained quietly about chest discomfort earlier that week, but it was brushed off the same way it always was. Red Foxx joked about heart attacks for decades. It was part of his brand. Cry wolf long enough, and people stopped listening. Around noon, during a scene rehearsal, Red suddenly stopped speaking. He reached toward his chest, his face tightening in a way DeMond says he had never seen before. Then he staggered and collapsed backward onto the set floor. Crew members froze for a split second, then laughed nervously. Some clapped. They thought it was another gag. Red lay still. Someone joked that he was committing too hard to the bit. Seconds passed, then a minute. Red did not get up. DeMond says the laughter drained from the room when they realized his eyes were unfocused and his breathing was labored. Someone shouted for help. A call went out. Paramedics were summoned. As they waited, DeMond knelt beside him, calling his name. Red did not respond. His body was heavy, sweating, unnatural in stillness. When paramedics arrived, they worked quickly. Oxygen, monitoring, urgent whispers. Red was rushed to Queen of Angels Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center, arriving shortly after 12:30 p.m. DeMond followed, shaken by the speed at which the day had turned. At the hospital, time slowed. Doctors moved in and out. Machines beeped. DeMond says Red regained brief consciousness once, just enough to open his eyes and attempt to speak. No one could understand the words. DeMond believes Red knew what was happening. He had talked about it before, about his heart, about how much damage he had done to his body. Over the next 4 hours, doctors fought to stabilize him. Officially, the cause would later be listed as a heart attack. At 4 p.m., Red Foxx was pronounced dead. The news spread fast. Headlines followed. Tributes poured in. Most reports described a sudden heart attack on set. A tragic end. A shocking but simple explanation. DeMond says it was anything but simple. In the days that followed, he began replaying details that did not sit right. Red had been under extreme stress, financial ruin, legal pressure, lingering addiction. And yet there was no public autopsy report released in detail. The narrative closed quickly. For a man whose life had been dissected publicly for decades, the final medical chapter remained strangely quiet. Then there were the conversations DeMond could not forget. He says Red had admitted something unsettling months earlier, that he had occasionally pretended to have heart attacks on set in the past, not as jokes, but as escape. When creditors circled, when anxiety spiked, when he needed filming to stop without explanation. DeMond did not believe him at first. It sounded like Red exaggerating, performing even in private. But what if, on October 11th, Red tried to do it again. What if the collapse was meant to buy time, delay pressure, push problems to another day, the way it had before? And what if this time, the body betrayed him? Demond speaks carefully here. He does not accuse, he recalls. He says Red had developed a habit of hiding substances, even late in life, even after medical warnings. Small amounts, just enough to function, just enough to push through exhaustion. He wonders aloud whether something Red took that morning tipped a fragile heart past its limit. Then comes the detail that unsettles him most. Demond says Red mentioned a visitor the day before his death, a man from his past, someone he described not with names, but with emotion, someone who brought up memories Red had spent a lifetime burying. Demond does not identify this person. He only says Red described the visit as heavy, emotional, and unresolved. According to Red, the man left behind a letter, short, personal, forgiving. Words Red did not share aloud but carried with him afterward. Demond has never seen that letter. In the hours after Red's death, it did not surface. It was not cataloged. It was not mentioned in official reports. Demond does not claim it proves anything. He only says it existed according to Red and then vanished. As rumors spread, darker theories emerged. Some whispered about poisoning. Others pointed to scandal, claiming Red knew secrets that made powerful people uncomfortable. Demond does not endorse these ideas, but he acknowledges that the lack of transparency fueled them. When a man collapses publicly, dies hours later, and leaves behind unanswered questions, speculation fills the vacuum. What Demond knows for certain is this: Red had been afraid of his heart long before it stopped. He talked about it, warned about it, joked about it, and no one took him seriously. Not the industry, not the crew, not even sometimes himself. The funeral that followed was modest. There was no grand Hollywood spectacle. Friends paid the costs, colleagues spoke through tears. Demond remembers standing there, listening to praise, and feeling an overwhelming disconnect between the legend being described and the man he had watched deteriorate in private. The most haunting moment, Demond says, came later, alone, sitting in silence, realizing that Red Foxx, who spent his life turning pain into laughter, had died in a room full of people who initially laughed while he was dying. That irony still troubles him. Now, decades later, Demond does not claim to have solved the mystery of Red Fox's death. He offers something quieter and heavier, a reminder that Red had been signaling distress for years. That addiction, fear, and pressure weakened the body long before the final moment. That sometimes a collapse looks theatrical, only because the performer has trained the world not to believe him. Red Foxx did not die laughing. He died exhausted. His heart gave out after a lifetime of strain, secrets, and survival. And Demond leaves us with a thought that refuses to fade. If Red had been believed earlier, if someone had stopped laughing sooner, if the man behind the jokes had been heard, would October 11th, 1991 have ended differently? That question, Demond says, is the real mystery. So this is where the story finally settles, not with a punchline, but with a reckoning. Red Foxx began life with almost nothing and climbed higher than most people ever imagined he could. From dirty jokes whispered in backroom clubs to primetime television that changed American comedy forever, his rise was undeniable. He broke barriers. He gave voice to a kind of black humor that refused to apologize. He opened doors that stayed open long after he walked through them. That part of the story is real, and it matters. But so does the cost. Behind the laughter lived addiction that never loosened its grip, gambling that turned victories into debts, relationships that collapsed under pressure, a body worn down by decades of survival mode. In the end, the man who once earned millions died with almost nothing to his name, buried not by wealth, but by friends who refused to let him go out unnoticed. It is a brutal contrast, and it forces us to confront a truth we rarely like to admit. Fame does not heal trauma. Sometimes it only hides it longer. Demond Wilson has given us pieces of a story that was never meant to be comfortable. He spoke of mentorship and generosity, but also of secrets, fear, and loneliness that followed Red to the very end. And there are still questions that refuse to disappear. Did Damon tell us everything he knows? Were there relationships Red could never acknowledge in public? Was there a part of his life deliberately buried to protect a legend in an unforgiving era? Or is the truth even heavier than what has already been shared? What remains unquestionable is Red Foxx's legacy. His influence echoes through generations of black comedians who found courage in his refusal to be quiet. His character Fred Sanford still lives in reruns, in quotes, in memory, long after the man himself faded. Laughter was his weapon, his shield, and ultimately, his prison. Now the story is in your hands. Do you believe Red's tragedy was inevitable, the result of choices made too early and wounds that never healed? Do you think there are still hidden chapters left untold, details that time and silence have protected? Or do you believe this is simply the painful cost of surviving in a system that takes everything before giving anything back? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Read what others see that you might have missed. And if you want more stories like this, where legends are remembered not as myths, but as human beings, subscribe to the channel. Because behind every laugh there is a truth.